If you clicked on this video, you obviously know that calisthenics isn't just about brute strength. We need to be able to access certain ranges of motion in our body, and that's exactly where mobility training comes into play. If you feel like your stretching routine hasn't been cutting it recently, this is the exact video for you because I'm going to break down all of the best stretches and mobility drills for calisthenics practitioners. And at the very end of the video, I'm also going to give you guys all of the specific lower body strengthening exercises that I use to improve for freestyle calisthenics without having any impact on my performance. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. There are three main reasons why we want to train mobility. The first and most obvious reason is that we're going to be able to access those new ranges of motion, which is super important for skills like the handstand press, the L-sit, and if you're more advanced, things like the Hefesto, for example. The second reason we want to train mobility is that it's obviously going to increase our recovery capacity. I find that a lot of calisthenics guys are really good at staying consistent with their workouts, but when it comes to recovery, that is obviously an area where they are lacking. So if you can take time once a week to really focus on the mobility, you're going to see that it's going to be easier to continue to work out more frequently. And the last reason, and maybe the most nuanced and most overlooked reason we want to train mobility, is the simple fact that it's going to increase our body awareness. So when you take time to check in with your entire body, you're going to find certain muscles are really tight and sore that you would have never guessed. And also it's really good at helping you understand where you are imbalanced in your body. So these are all really important things to know when you start to create your own program, or even as you go about your warm-up or workouts, for example. Even if you feel like some of these exercises aren't necessarily for you, I would recommend everyone watching try all of these at least once, so that way you can see where am I tight, which movements can I do or not do, and again, that'll increase your awareness as you go about your training. In terms of the equipment that I'm using today, it's pretty simple. I've got three main things. First is a couple different foam rollers. So I've got a softer foam roller and a spikier foam roller that will help me get into those more dense areas. The second piece of equipment I have is a stretch strap. So you don't necessarily need this. You could also use a dowel or a pull-up band. But if you have the stretch strap, it's really going to help you measure your mobility and flexibility in some of these stretches that you'll see later on. The last piece of equipment I'm using in this video are just simple pull-up bands. If you're doing calisthenics, you probably already have these anyways. They're really helpful for learning pull-ups and static skills, but you can also use them to increase range of motion in certain flexibility drills, which you'll see as well. First, we'll start with myofascial release, which is basically foam rolling. If you start with foam rolling in the beginning of your mobility sessions, you're going to find that your body is going to relax into these positions a lot easier. So that's why I would start with foam rolling first. I'm going to go over my calves, glutes, and back mainly here. For my back, I like to use the spikier foam roller just because my back is a bit more dense, and when I use a softer one, I really don't feel too much. This really depends on where you're at. I would probably start with the softer one, and then as you progress and you don't feel as much, you can invest in a harder foam roller. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm rolling up and down the muscle, and when I find a particular knot or really tight area, then what I'm going to do is sort of move the joints around the muscle to sort of break up the knot. So you can see I'm doing that here with my calves as well as spots in my back. So once I find that area, boom, I'm going to stick there, try to relax my breathing, and then break up the knot with light movements. Once you spend a little bit of time foam rolling, we'll move on and we'll kind of start with the lower body and work our way up. So we'll first start with the hips here. The first drill I'm doing is a 90-90. This is more of a mobility drill to make sure your internal and external rotation is solid, not necessarily going to carry over too much into calisthenics skills unless you're practicing stuff like the lotus, for example. A good rule of thumb here is that you want to have a 90-degree bend in both the front and back leg, and I'm also trying to support myself upright without leaning from one side to the other. If you are leaning or you're not able to get into that 90-degree bend with all of your lower body on the floor, it just means that you're tight and you should probably work on this drill. After I finish doing some light movements here, what I'm going to work on is lifting my ankle off of the floor, both my back and my front leg. So this is where that mobility comes into play. You'll see throughout this video, we're going to start with the stretching and end with the range of motion exercises. If you can do this, then you're good to go. All right, now we'll move on to the pike. The pike is definitely super helpful for things like the pike press or the V-sit, and you in general want to have good hamstring flexibility as well, which is why this one is important. If you've got really tight hamstrings and lower back, you can sit on a foam roller like I'm showing here. This is going to decrease the amount of hip flexion that you need, so it's actually going to make this stretch a bit easier. Once you find a good position, we're going to start with some dynamic pulses in and out. We're also going to play around with dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Basically what I mean by that is we're going to flex and point our toes, because when you do these different positions, you're going to find that it's going to stretch the calf a little bit more. So again, everyone is different. I would encourage you to play around with this movement, find what works for you, and then stay consistent with it over time. That's what tends to work best. You could also use a stretch strap like I'm showing here, and if you're really tight, this is another great way to train the pike as well. Once we finish with the stretching, then we'll move on to the mobility. In this case, we're going to focus on compression strength. So compression strength is super helpful for presses and V-sits, and we're also training our lower core and hip flexors here as well. There are plenty of different compression exercises, but these are the ones that I tend to do after my pike stretching, just because it's pretty accessible since we're already on the floor. When you bring your hands farther away from your hips, that's going to make this drill even harder. So again, you got to play around with the angle here, find what works for you, and stay consistent. Next, we'll move on to the straddle. Very similar to the pike stretch, except this one we're working more on things like straddle planche, straddle press handstand, and overall flexibility in general as well. You can use the foam roller just the same as with the pike stretch. And another thing that you can do here is actually use that pull-up band to make the range of motion a bit more intense. Just don't be like me. Don't use a really thick band at first. Try to use a thinner band and then work your way up over time. One of the important aspects with mobility training is that we also want to engage some of our muscles when we do these stretches as well. So for the pike stretch and for the straddle stretch, for example, I'm actively thinking about engaging my quads and all the other muscles in my lower body, because that's the same engagement that I'm going to be doing for a straddle press handstand or a straddle planche, for example. You don't want to just passively stretch. Really focus on engaging those muscles when you're doing these dynamic movements for the straddle position. Another thing we're going to do here is we're going to do a cross-body reach. This is really helpful for targeting your QL, which is basically the side of your lower back. I know a lot of times this area can get really tight for one-arm handstands, for example. So by doing this crossbody movement, not only are we stretching the lower body, but we're also getting the lower back as well. Lower back, hips, and hamstrings, they're all super connected. So that's why we want to do all of these dynamic movements, so that we can kind of find out which range of motion am I limited in and how can I improve that range of motion over time. Usually that's just by sitting in that tight position, breathing nice and slow, getting our nervous system to calm down so that we're able to lengthen even more. A lot of mobility and stretching is about breathing technique. You want to make sure you're slowing your breath down so that you're able to relax into that position. This is a technique I learned in yoga, but basically you want to inhale, lengthen, exhale, fold. So for the straddle stretch, for example, think about inhale, lengthening your spine, exhale, reaching more forwards. And you can continue to do that at the same time, slowing down the breath, particularly the exhale. That's what's going to calm down your nervous system. Again, once we finish the flexibility movements here, working on increasing that range of motion, now we'll move on into the compression strength. So we'll go for one leg at a time on each side, and then we'll go for both legs. All right, moving right along, we'll get into what's called a plow pose. So this one is also really good for V-sits, compression, but it's mainly targeting back flexibility as well. So I'm not the most flexible in this position. Looking back on the video, I could probably have worked on straightening my legs out and getting my hips up a little bit higher, but you can get the general idea watching this video. So I do want to get into bridge work, but before we do that, I think it's important that we warm up our shoulders a little bit with some shoulder extension movements. So let's get on into that. The first shoulder extension stretch that we're going to do is we're just going to take that stretch strap. You can also use a pull-up band and slide our hands behind us while trying to get our hips as far forward as possible on the ground. So when we do a lot of these calisthenics movements, we're in shoulder flexion a lot. So doing handstand push-ups, planches, even front lever and front lever pull-ups, we're in that shoulder flexion position. That's why training shoulder extension is going to be super, super helpful for mobility, because that's definitely an area a lot of calisthenics athletes lack. If you get really, really tight and just continue to work out and not necessarily stretch, that's where bicep tears can happen, other injuries can happen, and obviously we want you guys training as long and as hard as possible. When I'm doing the shoulder extension stretch, I'm specifically focusing on retraction. So a lot of movements are using protraction strength. Here, I'm really focusing on pinching my shoulders back and how much range of motion can I get in this particular stretch. Again, I'm working on breathing, slowing my breath down, and over time, lengthening that position. I particularly like using the stretch strap for this exercise because as you try to push yourself in this one, you'll find that your hands tend to slide out. So that's where either a pull-up band or a stretch strap can come in play. Next, we'll move on to the reverse tabletop. This is another shoulder extension mobility drill, but we're also combining a glute bridge with this as well. I would encourage you guys to get your hands as close as you can behind you when you do this movement, because we're really focusing as we push up on that shoulder retraction. This is the more mobility focused drill, where as you can see, the previous one was more so focused on flexibility. So again, flexibility and then mobility, that's the key to gains. All right, now that we've warmed up our shoulders, it's time to jump into the bridge. A couple of tips. You want to scoot your feet as close as you can to your butt and then shimmy onto your lower back before you try this drill. And again, for all you static guys out there, I think this drill is super, super important because we're doing so many things in a compressed position, hollow body, shoulder flexion, and we really want to make sure we have strength and range of motion in all areas of our body. That's why the bridge is super, super helpful, because we're basically in a super extended, open, and arched position, which we never really try to do in calisthenics. The more strength and range of motion we have in our entire body, the less likely it is that you're going to get injured. Moving on with the upper body, I'm going to show you guys a few different twists to stretch out your back. The first variation is targeting the lumbar spine, as you can see here, and the second variation with my knees stacked on top of each other is targeting more the thoracic spine. With that T-spine stretch, I also like bringing my arm up overhead, focusing on keeping the back of my hand on the floor when I do this movement. It's helping me work that overhead range of motion, which is super helpful for handstand and some other movements. Moving on, this one is the aptly scratched stretch. I think that's what it's called. Basically, you're trying to touch your hands behind your back. I am really not that flexible with this one, so I definitely use a pull-up band to help me bring my hands closer together. And on top of that, I do also like laying down during this stretch, because then it's a little bit more passive for me since I'm working on getting that range of motion unlocked in this position. This particular stretch is super, super helpful because we're basically testing the range of motion in our shoulder in all different planes. So external, internal rotation, abduction, adduction, and also flexion and extension in our shoulder. Basically, every single way our shoulder moves, we're stretching it in this position. This one, I often find that there's an imbalance between the left and right side when I start working with new clients. So definitely keep that in mind when you do this one. You want to decrease that imbalance over time. All right, moving on. So the next stretch is a shoulder adduction stretch. So this one I found actually doing a yoga class again. I really found this one helpful for alleviating tension and opening up the rear delt sort of area. So if you feel like your upper back is pretty tight, I'd really encourage you to give this one a try. I found this one super, super helpful, and I think you will too. So basically, I'm just working on relaxing again, getting my hips and my chest down as low as I can while trying to scoot my hands as far away from the midline of my body as possible. All right, this one is another banger. One of my other favorite stretches, the shoulder dislocate. I'm always doing this one to warm up and also giving it to clients as a mobility assessment for their shoulder range of motion. Some key things to keep in mind here is if your body is really tight, you're going to flare your chest out. You might bend your arms or even stick your neck out. It's really important here that we remember those cues, keep our nice and hollow body, don't stick your neck out, don't bend your arms, and work on increasing the range of motion over time by bringing your hands closer and closer to either the stretch strap or the pull-up band. I personally do think that the stretch strap is a bit more helpful, or even a dowel in this case, because the stretch strap isn't really going to bend or move like the pull-up band is. So it's totally okay if you use a pull-up band, but just know that, again, we're working on increasing that range of motion. So something like a stretch strap or a dowel stick is going to help you measure your mobility a lot more accurately. We'll move on to the wrist next. I know a lot of guys who practice calisthenics first starting, they get some pain in their forearm, elbows, or wrists. So you really want to make sure you condition and stretch your wrists and forearms out. This particular mobility drill I actually found from one of my coaches, Levon from France. Shout out to you, bro. This particular drill really helped me because I was experiencing some pain in my wrist when I was doing planche a while ago. For this particular drill, we're basically going to be leaning forward as far as we can. Once we've done 10 to a 15-second hold, we will come off the ground and actively try to pull our fingers back as close as we can to our face, really trying to get that range of motion in our wrists. Again, we're starting with the flexibility here with the stretching on the ground, and then we move into the mobility drill where we actively try to increase range of motion in our wrists. By doing it in this specific way, you're going to maximize the amount of gains that you get out of your flexibility and mobility training. Of course, I'm also spamming all of these other wrist stretches as well, all these different angles, working on pulsing up and down, bending my forearms in the supinated position. All of these stretches are really helpful. Honestly, the more wrist stretching you can do, I personally think the better, especially because in calisthenics, we're on our hands so much. So it's really important that you do these ones. I personally stretch my wrists out almost every single day, just to give you guys an idea. All right, cool. Let's move on to the neck. So the best mobility drill that I've found for my neck is just doing some simple CARs, or controlled articulate rotations. Basically just doing some clockwise and counterclockwise circles, but I'm really focusing on range of motion and not deviating from perfect form. So similar to the shoulder dislocates, if you find your shoulder coming up when you're, bringing your head around, that's a sign that you're tight. Or if you flare your ribs out, or if you're not able to get that entire range of motion in your neck, that's a sign that that particular side of your trap or maybe your neck is tight. This mobility drill is great because we're testing out the range of motion in our neck, and if you can't complete a full clockwise and counterclockwise circle without deviating from that perfect form, you've got some work to do. So when I was doing this, my neck was honestly feeling pretty okay, but if you find that, when you go to the left side, for example, it's feeling a lot tighter, that means you need to stretch the right side of your upper trap. So just doing some stretches there, then retest with that mobility drill, I often find is the best way to see if that's going to be an effective stretch for you. Those are all of the mobility exercises that we will get into in today's video. Obviously, there are a ton more that are super important, like the skin to cap, for example, that we didn't get to cover. But these are all of the things that I'm doing every single week to make sure that I can stay at the top of my game. Let's move on into the bonus section where I'm going to show you guys what I do for my lower body. So I remember being super locked in with my training, hitting calisthenics 3 to 4 times a week, weightlifting once to twice a week, resting. I had everything perfect, or at least that's what I thought, and I was getting frustrated why I'm not getting any gains in my calisthenics routine. I was realizing I was doing a bunch of bodybuilding and powerlifting exercises like barbell back squats, conventional deadlifts, and yes, these are great exercises, but the thing is, they take a huge toll on your calisthenics performance because we're targeting our CNS heavily when we do something like a back squat or a deadlift, and our CNS, or our central nervous system, is super important for our calisthenics performance because we're using the exact same thing. So of course I was getting tired because I was just frying my nervous system over and over again. What I've found that has been really, really beneficial for me is doing isometrics. And there's a few reasons for this. The first one is that the intensity is low so that I'm able to increase the frequency. So I'm actually training my legs not very hard or for very long, but for 3 to 4 days a week while also planching, front levers, freestyle, handstands, all of that. The other reason why isometrics are so awesome is because we're getting those strength gains, but we're also really focusing on strengthening our joints and tendons. Isometrics have been proven to be one of the best ways to strengthen the joints and tendons, and so this helps me really, really bulletproof my lower body and also get those strength gains at the same time. So as you can see, I'm doing tons of different isometrics for my adductor, for my hamstrings, for my hip flexors, for all of my legs. And again, this has been a game changer for me. If you guys try this, let me know. I'm definitely curious to hear your thoughts because this is something that I don't really see any other calisthenics guys doing. Most guys just skip their legs, and honestly, if you're doing freestyle, I really don't think that's a good idea. Obviously, when we're on the bar, we're using our entire body, especially to do things like spinning, not just our upper body. And if you're falling over and over again, that can have long-term impact on your body. So I'm doing a bunch of different isometrics multiple times a week. The other thing that I'm doing is the hip airplane movement. This is really going to help me stay stable in my entire lower body, especially because I'm falling off of that bar a lot. I want to make sure my hips are really stable and durable so that when I land, nothing is going to happen. So when I do these isometrics, I'm not doing very many, but I'm really focusing on hold time. So I try to hold for 30 to 60 seconds because that's what's been proven to really strengthen those joints and tendons. Not only am I doing that for the lower body, but also for the chest and bicep as well. As you guys can see here, I'm actually also recovering from a minor chest bicep strain a year ago, and incorporating these isometrics in has allowed me to train at my highest level without feeling that injury flare up again. That's everything that's going to cover today's video. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I've been trying really hard to bring you guys as much valuable content for calisthenics that I don't necessarily see anywhere else online. So if you have found some value out of this video, all I ask is that you engage with my content, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what's your favorite mobility exercise, or if you think I'm wrong, let me know. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.